Good evening. Tonight, let's take a slow, quiet journey into the dusty, creaking, and often suspicious world of medieval milling. And now, as you settle in, allow your body to sink deeper into rest. Let your mind drift across centuries to a time when the heartbeat of every village pulsed to the slow turning of a wooden wheel, where water flowed endlessly beneath stone arches, and flower dust filled the air like an ever-present mist. Tonight, we'll explore the life of a medieval miller. Neither noble nor poor, the miller stood on the margins, essential to the village, yet never quite trusted. Their hands worked the grain that fed the people, and yet those same hands were often believed to steal, deceive, and cheat the very community they served. This episode will unfold in 4 calming chapters. We'll begin by walking in the worn, wooden shoes of a typical medieval miller from early morning until weary night. An immersive glimpse into daily life, sound by sound, step by step. Then, we'll follow the true story of one miller's rise to unexpected wealth and dangerous notoriety, an individual both envied and despised. After that, we'll turn toward the quiet ruins of ancient watermills, long since abandoned. We'll explore what archaeologists have discovered and what lies hidden still in the silt and shadows. Finally, we'll glimpse the world of audits, tithes, and the nobleman's feast, where millers stood before stern lords and whispered numbers could mean fortune or punishment. So breathe gently. The wheel turns, the river flows. Let's begin. Let yourself drift. Not back 100 years, but perhaps 700 or 800. It is the late 13th century in rural England. Outside your narrow window, the stars have just begun to fade, replaced by a slate-grey dawn sky. The birds are still quiet. The only sounds are the gentle gurgle of the mill stream and the distant familiar knock of wooden wheels against water. You're a miller, and while many would call you dishonest, even greedy, none could say you're idle. Your bed is narrow, your blanket thin. The loft above your mill is not designed for comfort, only proximity. You wake to the clatter of the wooden gear shaft below you as it shifts in the night, just slightly, with the river's push. The grinding stones are quiet now, still asleep. But you know they'll soon come alive again. The straw mattress creaks beneath you as you sit up. You stretch. Every part of you is coated in a fine layer of something. Flour, sweat, splinters from sacks. You'll never be clean, not really. You reach for your tunic, stiff with old flour, and pull it over your linen undershirt. The fabric chafes, but it always has. Downstairs, you light a lamp, animal fat, smoky, and prepare the mill. First, you check the water gate outside. It's sticky today, the frost still clinging to the timbers. You nudge it open with a stick, letting the flow resume. Slowly, water surges back into the mill race and curls around the great wheel. It groans once, then begins to turn, and with it, your day begins. By the time you're fully awake, there are already voices outside. The sun hasn't yet cleared the trees, and yet you hear the familiar rhythms, grumbles, boots scuffing stone, and the unmistakable weight of grain sacks thudding to the ground. You open the door. No words are exchanged, just nods, suspicious glances. The villagers know they need you, but that doesn't mean they like you. You are a necessary part of life, a wheel in their village machine, but one that often grinds a little too much off the top. One man, a weaver you think, eyes the sack you're weighing. It's lighter, he says. You say nothing, because it's not lighter, but you've heard it before. You always hear it. In the mill's main chamber, the air is already thick with dust. The grindstones are waiting, heavy, ancient, and worn smooth from generations of grain passing between them. You take the first sack and pour the contents into the hopper. It's barley today, rough, golden, and sharp to the touch. As the stones begin to turn, a low vibration hums through the floor. The smell of friction, dust, and grain begins to rise. You can feel it in your nose. You'll be sneezing again before noon. The villagers come in turns, mostly women, older children, and thin men with shoulders that carry years of harvest. Some stand and watch as you work, their eyes flicking toward the scale when you take your cut, the mulcher. It is your right, and yet they stare as if you were robbing them at knife point. You take a handful of flour, weigh it, nod. The balance tilts, and the customer sighs. Some leave quietly, others mutter curses under their breath as they go. You're used to it. You've heard it for years. God, rot your scales. Hope your wheel breaks. Thieving son of the devil. To which you say nothing, always nothing, because responding would invite confrontation, and confrontation invites audits. And audits are worse than curses. By midday, your back aches from lifting. Your hands are dry and cracked. Tiny cuts on your knuckles sting with sweat. You wipe your brow with the back of your arm, leaving a pale streak of flour on your face. Your meal is simple. Bread, hard, dry, and a bit of cheese, already curling at the edges. You eat with your fingers, standing near the open door for a bit of fresh air. The river glistens in the low sun. The sound of the wheel never stops, a soft, sloshing lull, constant like your breath. As you resume work, a young girl enters. She carries a sack nearly her own size. It drags across the floor. She says little, just stares, tired and quiet as you load the grain. You ask who she's grinding for. She says her father died. Her voice cracks. She's come instead. You weigh the flour generously. Let her keep a little extra. You won't write it down. Later in the day, you clean the chute. It jams sometimes with damp husks. You use your bare hands to scrape it free. Your nails are filled with grit. Your sleeves soaked with wet grain. Toward evening, the village reeve stops by. He doesn't speak, just walks the perimeter, eyes scanning the yard. He pretends to be casual, but you know what he's here for. Too many complaints, perhaps. Or perhaps the steward of the Lord has whispered something again. You nod at him politely and continue working. When the line outside grows thin and the sacks are fewer, you sweep. Flour has settled everywhere. In the cracks, the joints, even in the rafters above. Mice have been at one sack again. You sigh, make a mental note to move the traps. You pull the stones apart slightly to cool them and close the sluice gate. The water wheel winds down, slower and slower, until it stops. Only now does the silence return. A rare silence. You listen to it for a while. Finally, you climb the ladder to your loft once more. The floorboards creak beneath your weight. Your knees are stiff. Your hands twitch with the ghost motion of the day's labour. You lie down, eyes adjusting to the dim light. You hear the last customer's footsteps fade. Then, nothing. Only your own breath. The faint drip of a leak in the corner, and the soft rustle of rats in the walls. Before sleep, your mind returns, always, to your book of accounts. You calculate, you second guess. Did you take too much from the carpenter? Too little from the shepherd? What will the steward say if he comes again? You roll over. The straw beneath you shifts. You close your eyes and count. Not sheep, not coins, but sacks, half sacks, handfuls. The numbers spin slowly, gently, as the mill once did. And at last, sleep. Let us now walk more slowly into the life of a man both necessary and resented. A man who rises earlier than most, though not to till the soil, and not entirely out of virtue, but out of habit and calculation. You are no longer the peasant standing in line with a heavy sack, for now you are the miller, a figure apart, an in-betweener, not quite of the people, not quite of the Lord, and every day this tightrope is walked with weary precision. Imagine waking before sunrise in your modest but well-built timber-framed home. The shutters creak as you open them to the blue-grey morning. The smell of damp wood and stale flour lingers in the air, as it always does. Outside, the wheel turns slowly in the channeled water. Even before the work begins, it groans faintly, a sound you know better than your own heartbeat. Inside, your wife is stirring the fire. The children sleep upstairs, tangled in wool blankets. You eat early. Coarse bread, goat cheese, small beer. Later you might take meat, perhaps salted pork if you're lucky, but not now. Now is for motion. Your house, attached to the mill, is larger than a crofter's hovel, but smaller than the Reeves Hall. Still, it's clean. Wooden beams darkened by time. A crucifix above the hearth. A chest that locks. And inside, a few luxuries. Imported combs, an iron key, 2 spoons of pewter. By 6, the first farmer arrives. He is older, with rope-worn hands and a crooked back. He greets you stiffly, shifting the heavy sack on his shoulder. You invite him in. He grunts. There is no love lost. He knows what you are, and so do you. You take his grain and inspect it, damp from storage, full of chaff. You weigh it on the old balance, your thumb carefully not pressing the scale. Not today, not with him watching. You record it in your ledger, a neat book with ink that still smells faintly metallic. The multure, your toll, is taken. Perhaps 1/16, though it varies. Some lords demand more, some less. The church says you must not steal, but where is the line between fair toll and theft? It blurs with the grind of every stone. You pour the grain into the hopper, and the wheel begins to move faster. The wooden gears knock against each other like old friends arguing. The stones spin, rubbing the life from each kernel, leaving behind a soft white flour and the scent of heat and dust. You do this a dozen times before noon. Each transaction is the same, and yet different. One man smiles too much, another refuses to meet your eye. A woman complains, her flour is short. You assure her it is not. You speak gently, you know the rules. A calm miller is a safe miller, but even calm cannot prevent the rumours. You are rich, they say. You steal, they say. You mix in chalk to stretch the flour, they whisper. You store the grain too long and take more in the measuring. Some say you keep the best flour for yourself and give the villagers the sweepings. These accusations are not new. They are as old as mills themselves. Chaucer's Canterbury Tales tells of the thieving miller, large, red-bearded, fond of ale and trickery. The stereotype is well known and deeply felt. But the truth is less exciting. You are careful, precise. If you took too much, you'd be punished. If you took too little, you'd be poor. After midday, you walk the short distance to the manor. You carry a satchel with coins, your ledger, and a small wedge of cheese wrapped in cloth. your own lunch, modest as always. The manor house is stone and timber, with a flag fluttering lazily in the wind. Inside, the bailiff waits. He is a hard man with a soft smile. You show your numbers, your tolls, your contributions. He inspects them slowly, his finger tracing each column. There is silence, and then a nod. It will do. You leave behind a gift, though no one names it so. A pouch of sweetmeats from the fair, a bottle of brandy wine from a travelling merchant, a pair of gloves for the steward's wife. It is not bribery, it is diplomacy. Back at the mill, your wife supervises the cleaning. Mice nest in the grain bins if unchecked. The stones must be lifted and dressed, their grooves redrawn, every few weeks. The watercourse must be clear. The sluice must not freeze. The whole building hums with risk. In winter, ice threatens the wheel. In summer, drought slows it. You pray for just enough rain, just enough sun. A failed harvest brings famine, but a bountiful one brings suspicion. Why are you still taking so much? As evening draws on, the last villager arrives, late and breathless. You do the work by lantern light. The air is heavy with flour dust. It clings to your skin, gets into your lungs. You cough sometimes, quietly. After dark, you eat a better meal. Stewed beans, salted fish, boiled onions. Your wife counts the day's tally. You talk about the harvest, the priest's visit, the baker's rising prices. The children doze near the hearth, playing with bones or stones. You climb to bed. The mattress is straw but clean. As you lie there, the rhythm of the water wheel lulls you. Thump, whir, splash. The mill never really sleeps. You dream of ledgers and rumours, of sacks and scales, of flour and fear. Being a miller is not glorious. It is not heroic, but it is comfortable if you can bear the stairs. And in the morning, the wheel turns again. Abandoned watermills and their buried secrets. There are places in the world where silence carries the weight of centuries. Not the silence of emptiness, but the kind that hums just beneath the threshold of hearing, like a memory whispered through wood, stone, and water. An abandoned watermill is one of those places. Imagine this. You're walking along a winding forest path, where the canopy filters the light into a gentle green haze. Your footsteps are soft against the loamy earth. The air is heavy with moisture, but not unpleasant. It smells of moss, of slow-moving water, and of fallen leaves in quiet decay. Then, there it is, half sunk into the landscape. Hidden beneath brambles, its lines softened by centuries of weather and neglect. A sagging wooden frame latticed with ivy, cracked millstones lying in the grass like ancient moons. The remnants of a wheel, once powerful, now crooked and motionless. The stream beside it still runs, murmuring as it always has, as if whispering the same story over and over, waiting for someone to listen. This is not a place of drama. It's not a castle or cathedral, but it was, once, a place of life. Throughout medieval Europe, from the British Isles to the hill villages of Tuscany, the watermill was a quiet revolution. Its very presence signalled a profound shift in how time, labour and food were understood. Before mills, grinding grain was a brutal, manual task. Hours of back-breaking labour with a quernstone, yielding only enough flour for a day or two. The mill changed that. It made time flow differently, and it did so with nothing more than water, wood and stone. But this machine, so simple in design, became layered with complexity, social, spiritual, and economic. In medieval England, watermills were often tied to manorial rights. If you lived on the Lord's land, you were expected, sometimes legally bound, to bring your grain to his mill and nowhere else. This right, known as banal milling, ensured a steady income for the landowner and tied the peasant even tighter to the feudal system. Refusing to use the Lord's mill, or worse, building your own, could result in fines, punishment, or worse. This made the mill both a tool of progress and a symbol of control. And yet, it wasn't only the nobility who clung to the mill. The church too saw its potential. Monastic orders often controlled large milling operations. These were not modest village structures, but massive undertakings, multi-chambered, vaulted, with intricate sluices and channels. The Cistercians especially became known for their advanced use of water power, using mills not only for grain, but for fulling cloth, crushing oil seeds, and even forging iron. When these monastic mills fell silent, often during the upheavals of the Reformation, they left behind ghostly echoes, stone-lined flumes still perfectly angled, Romanesque arches half swallowed by earth. In one abbey in Yorkshire, an entire subterranean channel system was uncovered, preserved like a fossil in mud. The wooden paddles of its wheel had long rotted away. But the iron hub remained, rusted but intact. You could still trace the flow of water with your eyes, imagining the quiet thrum of labour that once filled the space. Elsewhere, the ruins are more modest. Perhaps just a few stones, aligned too deliberately to be natural, a dip in the land that once held a mill pond, a small building with no windows, and a curious groove carved deep into the threshold, the daily wear of sacks being dragged over stone. In these places, archaeologists work with a special kind of patience. There is no gold, no treasure, but there is something precious, rhythm, the rhythm of a vanished life. Sometimes they find more than expected. In a mill site uncovered in the Low Countries, a sealed earthenware pot was discovered beneath the main beam. Inside were 3 coins, a chicken foot, a scrap of parchment with faint ink markings, and a tiny figure carved from bone. No official record mentions its placement, but its intent feels deliberate. Scholars speculate. Was it a charm, a curse, an offering? Perhaps to protect the mill from fire, a constant threat, or from the jealousy of neighbours. Or perhaps it was a superstition passed down, rooted in a time when water, machinery, and grain were mysterious forces, barely tamed. Even today, folklore clings to mills like mist to the riverbank. In Brittany, it was said that a drowned miller would haunt his wheel, causing it to groan and stutter until his bones were found. In the Tyrol, mothers were warned not to let their children stray near the mill stream, lest the water spirit mistake them for grain and pull them under. These stories weren't just entertainments. They were maps of fear, warnings carved into memory, because mills were not safe. Their mechanisms were simple but unforgiving. A loose belt could lash across your back, a sudden jam could send splinters flying, and the dust, the ever-present fine-grained dust of flour, could ignite into fire with the smallest spark. Explosions in mills, though rare, were deadly, and yet they endured. They shaped lives. And when they fell silent, whether by war, abandonment, or the march of technology, their absence echoed. In recent decades, as development and modern infrastructure push ever outward, many forgotten mills have been rediscovered. A bridge collapses, revealing a wheel hub beneath. A drainage project uncovers millstones buried like fossils. A child playing by a stream stumbles across a perfect mossy arch. And beneath the surface, questions remain. Who built this? Who worked here? Why was it left behind? We may never know all their names or all their stories, but in these abandoned places, there is something strangely reassuring. A reminder that history is not always made by kings and crusades. Sometimes it is shaped, slowly, steadily, by the turning of a wheel, by the grinding of stone, by the quiet labour of people you will never meet. If you ever find yourself beside a ruined mill, listen carefully, not for ghosts, but for rhythm. The faint memory of sacks being hoisted, the splash of water through the sluice, the hum of wooden gears, and perhaps, if the wind is just right, the low murmur of a voice. Not speaking, exactly, just remembering. The Lord's share, audits, fines, and feasts. Let your thoughts drift now, from the coarse grind of the millstone and the damp stillness of the riverbank, upward toward the village manor, rising modestly but firmly over the low hills. This is not the castle of a great lord with turrets and banners fluttering in the breeze. No, this is the manor of a local lord, perhaps a minor noble, or even a wealthy ecclesiastical tenant. Yet to the people of the village, to you, it may as well be the seat of a king. The structure itself is solid stone in places, timber-framed in others, weathered but imposing. The roof, if tiled, is a sign of wealth. If thatched, then trimmed often by hands who fear fire more than theft. Smoke threads upward from a chimney wide enough to roast a sheep within. Herb gardens line the edges of the path, and bees move slowly through the thyme and mint. The faint clop of hooves might be heard as the reeve arrives for a meeting. A man whose stern brow holds both duty and dread. This house, this presence, casts a long shadow, even over the mill, because in the feudal arrangement of medieval Europe, the mill was not just a convenience, it was a right and a monopoly. If you grew grain, whether barley, rye, or wheat, you were legally obliged to grind it at the Lord's mill. This obligation wasn't negotiable. It was codified in law and backed by centuries of tradition. Other mills, privately built, were typically forbidden. A peasant caught grinding grain at home with a hand mill or quernstone could be fined, or worse, have the offending stone broken in front of them. The Lord's share, the multure, was not generous. It could be anywhere from 1/16 to 1/12 of the grain brought in. For the poor, this loss could mean fewer loaves on the table. For the Lord, it was profit without labour. The miller collected it on the Lord's behalf, storing sacks in a locked chamber at the back of the mill, often beneath an iron key held by both the miller and the steward, lest either be tempted to help themselves, and temptations abounded. You see, the miller was paid in kind. He too took a portion officially sanctioned and unofficially supplemented. It became an open secret that millers often took more than their due, sifting a little extra here, shaking a bag just so, underweighing flour or over-measuring tolls, and so the audits came. Picture it, a grey morning in early spring. A steward arrives from the manor, bearing a wax tablet and accompanied by a clerk. They wear dark wool, heavy with damp, and speak little. The miller, nervous despite knowing their visit was scheduled, fidgets with his sleeves. The steward checks the weights, iron discs engraved with official marks. He inspects the storage bins. He runs a careful finger along the grinding stone and holds it to his nose, checking for signs of spoilage. He asks questions in a low, measured voice. How much rye last week? What was the toll from Widow Agnes's grain? Did the wheel falter during the last flood? The clerk writes everything down, Sometimes infractions are found, a missing portion, a wet bag of barley that should have been stored dry, a discrepancy in the tallies. Punishments could follow, a fine, often painful, a warning if the Lord was lenient, rarely a replacement, the miller dismissed and replaced by another man, one the steward trusts more, though the villagers rarely do. At other times the audit ends with a slow nod. The steward takes a sack of grain and departs. The miller exhales, and the rhythm of the stones begins again. But the manor is more than a centre of control. It is also, occasionally, a place of festivity. Twice a year, perhaps more, the Lord hosts a feast. Harvest time, Easter, the feast of the local saint, all offered excuses for celebration. Peasants may be allowed into the courtyard. The miller, if favoured, might be invited to stand at the edge of the great hall, cup in hand, watching as trenchers are filled with coarse bread and stew, thick with onions and dried meat. Much of the bread served came from the Lord's share of grain, milled dutifully, baked in large stone ovens by servants who spent entire nights shaping loaves. The ale, too, relied on the mill. Barley malt, soaked and ground and fermented in oaken barrels, was drawn off in thick, foamy draughts. The air would buzz with smoke, laughter, fiddle music, and the quiet satisfaction of a lord whose power was visible, edible, and inescapable. There is a sharp contrast between the mill's shadows and the manor's glow. Where the miller might labour with dusty hands and clouded eyes, the steward dines beneath a carved beam roof. Where the village wife dries her skirt beside the hearth, the lord's lady wears wool dyed in imported indigo and sips wine from a narrow glass brought from Gascony. And yet, their lives remain deeply intertwined. If the miller cheats, the manor starves. If the manor squeezes, the miller breaks. And always the peasants wait, grain in hand, for the wheel to turn again. As time trickled forward, these relationships evolved. Serfdom waned, cash rents replaced tolls. The Black Death shattered population centres, and suddenly peasants held more leverage. But for centuries before that, the feudal web remained tightly knotted, and at its centre, always humming and grinding, was the mill. So the next time you see a quiet country stream, or the half-crumbled wall of a forgotten watermill, think not only of bread and flour, but of power and suspicion and the long shadow of the Lord's share. The wheel turned, and always someone was watching. As our journey through the dust and din of medieval milling draws to a close, take a deep breath. Let the rhythm of the stones, their ancient grinding cadence, settle somewhere in the back of your mind, like a low hum beneath the surface of things, steady, predictable, endlessly circling. In the world we left behind just now, the life of a miller was one of paradox, resented yet relied upon, dirty yet indispensable, wealthy yet watched. The miller stood at the literal turning point of the community's lifeblood, where harvest became sustenance, and with that came tension. Power, however small, attracts suspicion, and work, however necessary, rarely brings praise when wealth trickles unevenly. You can almost hear the voices now, the muttered complaints of peasants who felt shorted by a handful of grain, the dry laughter of a reeve taking careful note of a miller's accounts, the creak of the great wheel as it turned, slow and steady, long into the night. Day after day, a miller rose before dawn, slipping into thick woolens stiff with flour, stepping into cold boots and shuffling to the mill house still damp with dew. He knew his labour would be questioned, his motives distrusted, yet the stones waited for no man. The the river flowed regardless of gossip or guilt. There's something haunting in that rhythm, isn't there? Even now, centuries later, the life of a medieval miller still speaks to something familiar, the tension between work and reward, between service and suspicion, and the endless grind of routine, which for many of us today, though quieter and cleaner, hasn't truly changed. You might imagine as you close your eyes the sound of a watermill far in the distance, not loud, not urgent, just there, always there, turning, grinding, whispering in its own ancient tongue, the soft scrape of stone on stone, the whisper of wind through wooden slats, the flicker of lamplight on a sack of grain, the slow gathering of flour in a worn wooden trough. That was the miller's lullaby. And perhaps, in some way, it becomes yours tonight too. So now, let the sounds of that long-forgotten world fade gently into silence. Let the weight of the past grow light, like flour rising in the air. Let the ancient wheel turn without you for a while. You've done enough for today. Sleep well, sleep deeply, and when you wake, may the world feel just a little softer.